Before we dive in, a quick but critical reminder. The information in this presentation is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not legal advice, and watching this video does not create an attorney-client relationship. Always consult with a qualified professional for advice tailored to your specific situation. Imagine you're scrolling through your phone. It's late. You're flipping past dance videos, cooking hacks, and your cousin's vacation photos. Then, a sharply dressed woman with a confident smile looks directly at you and says, "Stop scrolling. Here are 3 illegal things your landlord is doing that you think are perfectly normal." You pause. You watch the 45-second video, and your jaw slowly drops. In less than a minute, you've just learned more about your rights as a tenant than you have in your entire life. This isn't a rare occurrence. This is the new front line of the legal world. And it's a revolution being televised one short-form video at a time. The old image of a lawyer is dead. Forget the stuffy, wood-paneled office, the $1,000 an hour retainers, and the impenetrable legal jargon. The new town square for legal information isn't a courthouse. It's your social media feed. And the new titans of the industry aren't partners at massive, faceless firms. They are lawyer influencers, armed with ring lights and iPhones, building multi-million-dollar empires by demystifying the one thing that has been intentionally kept complicated and expensive for centuries: the law. And at the very center of this seismic shift is one woman who has cracked the code better than almost anyone else: Lauren the lawyer. If that name sounds familiar, it's because she has masterfully embedded herself into the digital consciousness of millions of Americans. She's the friendly, authoritative face you see breaking down confusing terms of service, explaining what to do after a car accident, or giving you the script on how to negotiate a higher salary. She has built a media powerhouse that rivals established legal institutions, and she's done it by shattering every single rule the old guard of the legal profession holds dear. So why should you care? Because this is about so much more than a TikTok trend. In this deep dive, we are going to dissect the entire playbook of the lawyer influencer. You will learn the specific strategies they use to build massive, loyal audiences. We will uncover the business model that turns free social media content into millions of dollars in revenue. We will expose the fierce controversy and the ethical tightrope these creators walk, and why traditional law firms are absolutely terrified of them. By the end of this, you will understand a fundamental reshaping of one of America's oldest and most powerful industries, and more importantly, what it means for you as a consumer, an employee, or a business owner. This is the story of how power is shifting from the ivory tower to the palm of your hand. For generations, the legal profession operated like a fortress. The walls were built with confusing language, the gates were kept by exorbitant fees, and the only way in was to pay a king's ransom for a few minutes of a lawyer's time. It was a system designed for exclusivity, not accessibility. If you had a simple question, you had 2 choices: risk a huge bill by calling an attorney, or remain in the dark. This created a massive justice gap, a chasm between the everyday legal needs of ordinary people and their ability to get help. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the internet. Into this gap stepped a new breed of lawyer. They were young, digitally native, and they saw the systemic failure not as a problem, but as the single greatest market opportunity of their generation. They understood something their older colleagues didn't. People aren't just looking for a lawyer. They are starved for legal information. They want to understand their rights without having to take out a second mortgage. Enter Lauren. She didn't just join the conversation. She started to lead it. Her content is a masterclass in translation. She takes a dense, intimidating topic like contract law, for example, and boils it down into a simple, actionable 60-second lesson. She uses trending audio, popular formats, and a conversational tone that feels less like a legal lecture and more like getting advice from a whip-smart, trusted friend. Think about the genius of this. A traditional law firm might spend $50,000 on a billboard that 10,000 people drive past, half of whom don't even notice it. Lauren, from her home office, can create a single video about spotting illegal clauses in an apartment lease, and that video can be seen by 5 million people in 48 hours. 5 million. That is a scale of reach that was unimaginable for a solo practitioner just a decade ago. She's not just finding clients. She is creating a new, legally literate market that never knew it needed a lawyer in the first place. Her strategy is built on a foundation of providing immense, upfront value for free. While old-school lawyers hoard their knowledge behind a paywall, Lauren gives it away. She'll teach you how to form an LLC, what to look for in an employment contract, or how to properly document a personal injury. this isn't just generosity, it's a brilliant marketing funnel. By empowering her audience, she builds immense trust and authority. So when someone in her audience of millions finally does have a problem that requires hiring a lawyer, who is the first person they think of? It's not the guy on the billboard they can't remember. It's the person who has already helped them, educated them, and earned their trust, one helpful video at a time. But this meteoric rise has not come without a firestorm of controversy. The legal establishment, the state bar associations, and the partners at so-called big law firms are watching this with a mixture of horror and disbelief. They accuse these influencers of oversimplifying complex issues to the point of being dangerous. They raise serious ethical questions. Is this legal advice? Does it violate rules against solicitation? Are they creating a false sense of security in viewers who might need real, personalized counsel? These are not trivial questions. The line between legal information and legal advice is a blurry and heavily regulated one. One wrong step, one piece of advice that is misconstrued by a viewer, could have devastating consequences, not just for the viewer, but for the influencer's career and law license. It's a high-wire act performed without a net, in front of an audience of millions. And Lauren isn't alone. She's the leading figure in a rapidly growing movement. There's Erica Kullberg, the queen of reading the fine print, who went viral for exposing the hidden perks you're entitled to from airlines and credit card companies. There's attorney Hugo Lord, who uses dramatic skits and a what would you do format to teach legal principles in a way that's as entertaining as a primetime TV show. Each has a unique niche, a distinct brand, but they all share a common DNA. They have bypassed the traditional gatekeepers of the legal world to speak directly to the people. They have effectively built the largest, most accessible law library in human history, and its doors are open 24/7 on your smartphone. But how exactly did this happen? How did a recent law school graduate with a knack for social media manage to build a brand more recognizable and trusted by millennials and Gen Z than the American Bar Association itself? The answer involves a deep understanding of platform algorithms, a courageous willingness to break unwritten rules, and one specific viral moment that poured gasoline on the fire and changed the game forever. And to understand that, we need to look at how the journey began. The journey didn't begin in a flashy content house or a high-tech studio. It began where so many legal careers do, in the hallowed, intimidating halls of a top-tier law school. Lauren, like thousands of other ambitious students, was on the prescribed path to success. The path that promised prestige, financial security, and a corner office with a view. It was a world defined by Socratic methods, late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and anxiety, and the relentless pressure of the curve. The goal was singular: excel, get recruited by a prestigious law firm, and begin the long, arduous climb up the corporate ladder. And she did it. She navigated the grueling 3 years, passed the bar exam, a rite of passage so notoriously difficult it's a punchline in itself, and landed a coveted position as a junior associate at a major firm. This is the dream, the very pinnacle of what law school graduates are taught to aspire to. It's a world of mahogany desks, sharp suits, and high-stakes litigation. But behind the polished facade lies a brutal reality. The life of a junior associate, particularly in what's known as big law, is a trial by fire. It's a world of billable hours, where your life is measured in 6-minute increments. Days bleed into nights, weekends become a distant memory, and the work is often a thankless grind of document review and legal research, buried deep within the machinery of a massive case. You're a small cog in an enormous, powerful engine. The partners at the top are the legendary figures you rarely see, and your direct superiors are often overworked, stressed-out senior associates who pass that pressure down the line. It's an environment that can systematically strip away the idealism that brought you to law in the first place. The desire to help people, to argue for justice, gets lost in a blizzard of paperwork and procedural minutiae. For Lauren, this traditional path started to feel less like a dream and more like a gilded cage. She was performing the duties of a lawyer, but she wasn't connecting with the reason she became one. The work was intellectually stimulating, yes, but it was also isolating. The law, which governs every aspect of our lives, felt walled off from the very people it was meant to serve, hidden behind a barricade of jargon, complexity, and prohibitive costs. This disconnect is a quiet crisis in the legal profession. Many young, brilliant lawyers burn out within their first few years, disillusioned by the chasm between their expectations and the reality of the job. They look around and see a career path stretching out for 30 or 40 years that looks exactly the same, just with a slightly bigger office and more responsibility. And it was in the midst of this grueling routine somewhere between a mountain of discovery documents and another missed dinner with friends, that the seed of an idea was planted. It didn't come from a business seminar or a career coach. It came from her phone. Like millions of others during the late 2010s, she was scrolling through social media. But she wasn't just seeing dance challenges and comedy skits. She was seeing a new kind of creator emerge. Doctors were demystifying medical conditions. Financial advisors were breaking down stock market basics. Chefs were teaching gourmet cooking from their home kitchens. These professionals were taking their specialized, often intimidating knowledge and making it accessible, entertaining, and free for anyone with an internet connection. They were building communities, establishing trust, and creating a direct line to their audience, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of their industries. And a question began to form in her mind. Where were the lawyers? The legal world was notoriously slow to adapt. It was an old-school institution, steeped in tradition and governed by strict, often archaic rules about advertising and client solicitation. The prevailing wisdom was that social media was frivolous, undignified, and potentially a professional minefield. You could get disbarred for saying the wrong thing. It was seen as a risk with no reward. But Lauren saw something different. She didn't see risk, she saw an opportunity. A massive gaping hole in the market. People were desperate for legal information. They were turning to Google, to forums, to unqualified strangers for advice on life-altering situations. Divorce, starting a business, dealing with the landlord, understanding a contract. The public's access to the law was fundamentally broken. It was too expensive, too complicated, and too intimidating. What if she could use these short-form video platforms, not to give specific legal advice, a critical distinction, but to provide legal information? What if she could pull back the curtain and explain the concepts that affect everyone's daily lives? The idea was radical. It was a direct challenge to the stuffy, insular culture of the legal profession. Her peers and mentors would have likely called it career suicide. But the pull was too strong. So she started experimenting. The first few videos were probably what you'd expect. A little awkward, a bit stiff. She was a lawyer trained to be precise, risk-averse, and formal. But the platforms, especially TikTok, demanded the opposite. They reward authenticity, creativity, and a willingness to be a little weird. Slowly, she began to shed the persona of the big law associate and find her own voice. She realized that people didn't want a lecture. They didn't want to read a legal brief. They wanted to understand how a headline-grabbing lawsuit actually worked. They wanted to know the red flags to look for in their apartment lease. They wanted to know what their rights were during a traffic stop. She started using trending sounds, popular memes, and engaging storytelling formats to explain complex legal doctrines in 60 seconds or less. She broke down the impenetrable wall of legalese with simple analogies and clear, concise language. She wasn't just a lawyer on TikTok. She was speaking the native language of the platform. She explained contract law by analyzing the terms and conditions of Willy Wonka's golden ticket. She discussed intellectual property through the lens of a viral Taylor Swift song. She was meeting people where they were, in a format they enjoyed, and providing immense value. She was doing what the entire legal education system and the profession at large had failed to do. She was making the law accessible. This was the foundational shift. She wasn't just marketing a law firm. She was building an audience. She was creating a community of people who were now more informed, more empowered, and more engaged with the legal system that governs them. Each video was a small act of rebellion against the old guard. It was a declaration that legal knowledge should not be a secret, held captive by a select few. This initial phase was about planting a flag, testing the waters, and proving a concept. She was building momentum, video by video, follower by follower. But building a following and sparking a revolution are two different things. The slow burn was about to be hit by an accelerant, a single explosive event that would take her from being a niche creator to a mainstream phenomenon. That accelerant had a name: Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. It wasn't just a court case, it was a cultural supernova. For 6 weeks in the spring of 2022, the world stopped to watch. Live-streamed from a courtroom in Fairfax, Virginia, it was raw, unfiltered, and utterly captivating. It was the biggest reality show on the planet, and everyone had a front row seat. The digital town square was on fire with opinions, hot takes, and memes. Every clip was dissected, every facial expression analyzed. But amidst this hurricane of content, a massive void formed, a vacuum of understanding. People were watching hours of testimony, but they didn't speak the language of the courtroom. They heard lawyers shout objection, but didn't know why. They saw judges sustain or overrule but couldn't grasp the significance. The mainstream media, for its part, was largely unhelpful. Cable news channels would bring on legal analysts for a 2-minute segment, sandwiched between commercials, offering superficial commentary that barely scratched the surface. They were speaking at the audience, not to them. They were part of the old world, the polished and impenetrable institution of law that felt a million miles away from the person scrolling on their phone. This is the moment where Lauren the lawyer's slow burn met wildfire. She was already there, on the ground, speaking the language of the internet. She wasn't a talking head beamed in from a sterile studio. She was one of them, but with a law degree. And she saw the void. She understood that what people craved wasn't another opinion on who was right or wrong. They craved clarity. They wanted a translator. It started with a single word that had become a global meme: hearsay. It was the trial's most frequent objection, a punchline for countless TikToks and Twitter jokes. But what did it actually mean? Lauren saw the opening. She posted a video. No fancy graphics, no elaborate set. Just her looking into her phone's camera, breaking it down. She didn't just recite the textbook definition. She explained it with the energy of a friend letting you in on a secret. She would say something like, "Okay, everyone is joking about objection, hearsay, but let's actually talk about it because it's the key to understanding half of this trial." Imagine you're on the witness stand. A lawyer asks you, "What did your friend Bob tell you about the incident?" You can't answer that. Why? Because Bob isn't in the courtroom. We can't cross-examine Bob. We can't look him in the eye and ask, "Hey Bob, is that really what you saw? Are you sure? Were you wearing your glasses?" The court wants to hear from the source, from the person who actually saw or heard something themselves. Not what someone told you they saw or heard. That's it. That's the core of hearsay. It's an out-of-court statement being used to prove that what it says is true. And the court generally says, "Nope, we're not allowing that. Bring Bob in here and put him under oath." And then she'd add the nuance. Now, are there exceptions? Oh yeah, there are dozens. Like a ton. An excited utterance, a statement against interest, a dying declaration. It gets complicated. But 90% of the time you hear that objection, it's because a lawyer is trying to stop a witness from essentially being a parrot for someone who isn't there to testify. That video exploded. It wasn't just a video, it was a key. It was a Rosetta Stone for legalese. Suddenly, millions of people who had been passively watching the trial felt like they were active participants. When a lawyer stood up and yelled hearsay, they weren't just hearing a soundbite, they were analyzing legal strategy in real time. They were in on the game. Lauren's video was shared tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of times. Her follower count wasn't just climbing, it was a vertical line. She had struck gold. She realized people weren't just curious, they were starving. So she doubled down. Then she tripled down. Her content became the unofficial companion guide to the Depp Heard trial. Every evening after the day's proceedings, she would post recaps. Not just what happened, but why it happened. She explained the difference between direct examination and cross-examination. She broke down the strategy behind why a lawyer might ask a seemingly bizarre or irrelevant question. She explained the concept of opening the door, where one side's questioning allows the other side to bring in evidence that was previously inadmissible. Her apartment became a virtual classroom. Her TikTok and Instagram became the lecture hall. And the world was her student body. Her follower count surged from the tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands, and then, astonishingly, it crossed the million mark. All in the span of a few weeks. She wasn't just a creator anymore. She was the dean of a pop-up law school for the entire internet. What made her so different, so magnetic, was her authenticity. While the old-guard legal analysts on television spoke in measured, formal tones, Lauren was passionate, informal, and relatable. She used internet slang. She made jokes. She reacted with the same shock and fascination as her audience. She created a community. Her comments sections weren't just a stream of noise. They were vibrant forums where people debated legal theories, asked intelligent questions, and shared their own insights. People weren't just watching Lauren. They felt like they were watching the trial with Lauren. She was their legally savvy best friend, guiding them through the chaos. She started doing live streams that would draw tens of thousands of concurrent viewers, a number that would make a cable news producer weep. She would answer questions in real time, demystifying complex procedures on the fly. She was building a media empire from her living room, armed with nothing more than a ring light, a smartphone, and her deep knowledge of the law. The Depp Heard trial was the perfect storm. It combined celebrity, high-stakes drama, and unprecedented access through the live feed. But it was Lauren who harnessed the storm. She didn't just ride the wave of interest, she built the surfboard. She saw a fundamental need that the entire established media landscape had missed. People don't want to be told what to think. They want to be given the tools to think for themselves. By the time the verdict was read, Lauren was no longer just Lauren the lawyer, a niche TikToker. She was a bona fide media personality, a trusted voice for millions. But the most significant thing wasn't her newfound fame or her massive following. It was the proof of concept. She had proven on a global stage that there was a massive, untapped, and intensely hungry audience for accessible legal content. She had exposed a crack in the ivory tower of the legal profession and kicked it wide open. She hadn't just explained a trial. She had fundamentally changed the public's relationship with the law. The revolution was no longer a slow burn. It was a full-blown inferno, and she was standing right at its center. The question now was, what happens when the fire you started begins to spread? The fire spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. In the hallowed wood-paneled halls of established law firms, partners with six-figure corner offices started murmuring her name. First it was dismissive, a joke shared over scotch and cigars. Did you see that dancing lawyer on the internet? But the laughter was nervous, edged with a confusion they couldn't quite articulate. They were looking at a phenomenon they didn't understand, using a language they didn't speak on a platform they considered beneath them. And yet, the numbers were undeniable. The engagement was astronomical. The public, their potential clients, were listening to her. The joke was starting to feel a little too real. For younger associates, buried under mountains of discovery and billable hour requirements, Lauren wasn't a joke. She was a revelation. She was proof that there was another way. A way to be a lawyer without sacrificing your personality, without becoming a cog in a machine that had been running the same way for 100 years. Suddenly, law students and newly minted attorneys weren't just idolizing Supreme Court justices. They were studying Lauren's TikToks. They saw a path to building a personal brand, a direct line to an audience that could one day become clients, a way to have a voice and a platform without waiting 20 years to make partner. And so the Great Migration began. A digital gold rush. Lawyers from every conceivable practice area started flooding onto social media, convinced they could replicate her success. It was for a time a cringeworthy spectacle. You had tax attorneys attempting to explain the intricacies of Form 1040 through awkward lip-synced audio clips. You had corporate litigators in stiff, oversized suits trying to point at text bubbles with all the rhythmic grace of a scarecrow. They saw the formula, lawyer plus trendy audio plus legal tip, and thought it was simple math. But they were missing the most critical variable in the equation, Lauren. They failed to understand that her success wasn't a formula. It was alchemy. It was the perfect fusion of her specific personality, her genuine passion for teaching, her natural charisma, and her uncanny sense of timing. She wasn't a lawyer playing a character on social media. She was simply being herself, amplified. The copycats, in their rush to cash in, were just lawyers in a costume. The public could smell the inauthenticity a mile away. Their videos were the legal equivalent of a dad trying to use teenage slang, well-intentioned, maybe, but deeply, profoundly uncool. The engagement was abysmal. The comments were brutal. For most, the experiment was a quiet failure. Their accounts left dormant after a few weeks of desperate, algorithm-chasing posts. It seemed for a moment that Lauren would be a singular phenomenon, a lightning strike impossible to bottle. But then the landscape began to evolve. The first wave was imitation, but the second wave was adaptation. Smarter players entered the field. They weren't trying to be Lauren, they were trying to learn from her. They understood the core principle: translate complex legal information into accessible, entertaining content for a specific audience. And so the niches began to form. A fast-talking, high-energy personal injury lawyer from Texas started going viral, not by dancing, but by reacting to insane car crash videos and breaking down, in real time, who was at fault and why. He was brash, loud, and wore a cowboy hat in his videos, a far cry from Lauren's polished, approachable style. But he was authentic to himself, and his content exploded within the car guy community. Then came the intellectual property attorney from Silicon Valley, a self-proclaimed nerd. She used clips from Marvel movies and popular video games to explain the complex worlds of trademark and copyright law. She wasn't trying to be cool. She was leaning into her geekiness, and in doing so she captured an enormous, previously untapped audience of creators, artists and entrepreneurs who desperately needed her advice but were too intimidated to call a traditional law firm. She spoke their language. She understood their world. This was a different kind of fire. It wasn't the single towering inferno of Lauren's initial rise. It was 1,000 smaller, controlled burns, each one carving out a specific territory in the digital wilderness. The lawyer influencer was no longer a monolith. It was a mosaic. There was the immigration queen, a bilingual lawyer who used heartfelt stories to demystify the green card process for immigrant communities. There was the family law bro, who gave blunt, no-nonsense advice about divorce and custody battles, earning a legion of followers who appreciated his directness. Law firms, seeing the success of these individual practitioners, finally began to stir from their analog slumber. Their first attempts were clumsy. They assigned their summer intern to handle the TikTok, resulting in soulless, committee-approved videos that had all the personality of a legal disclaimer. But they too started to learn. They began hiring social media managers, investing in production quality, and encouraging their younger, more media-savvy attorneys to become the face of the firm online. The game was changing. What started as one woman's experiment was now becoming a core marketing strategy for an entire industry. Lauren was no longer just the pioneer. She was now the incumbent. She had gone from being the disruptor to being the standard against which all others were measured. And with that came a new kind of pressure. The very space she had created was now crowded with competitors, all vying for the same eyeballs, the same clicks, the same potential clients. The questions she faced were no longer about if she could build an audience but how she could keep them. How do you stay relevant when everyone is using your playbook? How do you innovate when the niche you invented is suddenly the hottest trend in your profession? She had taught millions about the law, but now she was facing a new, unfamiliar legal challenge of her own: the law of diminishing returns. The throne was hers, but for the first time, she could hear the footsteps of others approaching, and she knew she couldn't just sit there. She had to make a move. And that move wouldn't be another viral dance or a clever legal take on a trending sound. That was the old game, the game of fleeting attention. Lauren understood, with the chilling clarity of a litigator sensing a weakness in the other side's argument, that the currency of social media, likes, views, shares, was fundamentally unstable. It was like building a mansion on rented land. The landlord, in this case a faceless algorithm, could change the terms of the lease at any moment, without warning or appeal. One day you're on the For You page, the next you're screaming into the void. She had seen it happen to countless other creators. They were titans one month, trivia questions the next. The throne she occupied wasn't made of stone. It was made of data, and data was fickle. The footsteps she heard weren't just other lawyers. They were nurses, teachers, mechanics, chefs, experts of all kinds flooding the platform, each offering their own slice of valuable free information. The novelty of a lawyer on TikTok was wearing off. The platform was maturing, and the audience was becoming more discerning. They were developing an immunity to the quick-hit content that had built her empire. The law of diminishing returns wasn't just a threat. It was a verdict being handed down in real time. More effort was yielding less growth. The dopamine rush of a video hitting 1 million views in an hour was being replaced by a low-grade anxiety. She was on a treadmill, running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. This realization sparked a paradigm shift in her thinking. She started looking at her audience not as viewers but as clients. What was their problem? For months, her comments and DMs had been a fire hose of the same recurring questions. Can my landlord do this? What should be in my freelance contract? How do I trademark a name for my small business? These weren't abstract legal hypotheticals. These were real-world problems from real people, often small business owners, artists, and creators like herself, who were navigating a complex world without $1,000 an hour legal team on retainer. They couldn't afford a lawyer, but they couldn't afford not to have legal protection either. They were stuck in a legal no man's land. And right there, in that chasm of need, Lauren saw her next kingdom. The answer wasn't to create more free content, to shout louder into the growing storm. The answer was to build a bridge. To take her most valuable asset, not her follower count, but the trust she had meticulously built with that audience, and convert it into something tangible. Something they could own. Something that solved a real painful problem. She decided she wasn't just going to be an influencer anymore. She was going to be an entrepreneur. The idea was deceptively simple. A suite of affordable, easy-to-use, lawyer-drafted legal templates. Contracts for freelancers, privacy policies for websites, non-disclosure agreements for startups. all the foundational documents that creative people and small businesses desperately needed, but were too intimidated or too broke to get from a traditional law firm. She would call it the legal pad. It was a direct, elegant solution, but the path from idea to execution was a brutal, humbling slog. This was a different kind of work. It wasn't about finding the perfect trending audio or crafting a witty 15-second hook. This was about the lonely, unglamorous grind of creation. For the next 4 months, Lauren effectively disappeared. Her posting schedule became erratic. Her vibrant, energetic presence on screen was replaced by the pale, blue glow of a laptop screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She spent hundreds of hours buried in legal texts, drafting, revising, and perfecting each document. She wasn't just creating a product, she was creating a shield. Each clause, each sentence had to be ironclad. She knew that if she sold a faulty contract, the reputational damage would be catastrophic. The same audience that had crowned her their queen would be the first to lead the revolution. She poured her life savings into the project, hiring web developers to build a seamless e-commerce site and user experience designers to make the process of buying and using a legal document feel as easy as ordering a pizza. She was cross-examining her own work, stress-testing every line of text, imagining every possible way a user could misinterpret it. The self-doubt was immense. Was she a content creator playing business? Was this a massive, arrogant miscalculation? The influencer world is littered with the corpses of failed merch drops and half-baked courses. She was terrified of becoming another statistic. As the launch date approached, a new kind of fear emerged. Not the fear of failure, but the fear of success. She was about to ask the community she had nurtured on a foundation of free value to open their wallets. This is the single most terrifying moment in any creator's journey. It's the moment the relationship changes forever. You risk being seen as a sellout, a grifter who used trust as a marketing funnel. She decided to face it head-on. A week before the launch, she posted a raw, unfiltered video. No snappy edits, no trending music. Just her, sitting in her home office, looking exhausted but determined. She explained the plateau, the burnout, the feeling of running on a hamster wheel. She laid bare the economics of being a creator. And then she explained the DMs, the recurring problems she saw, and her desire to build a real solution. She wasn't just selling a product. She was presenting her case to the jury, her audience. She was making an argument for her own value and for theirs. The video was a massive gamble. It could have been met with cynicism and accusations, but it wasn't. The response was an overwhelming flood of support. People saw the authenticity. They saw the grind. They didn't see a sellout. They saw one of their own, evolving and trying to build something real. They saw her solving a problem they actually had. On launch day, she sat at her desk, staring at the live sales dashboard, her heart pounding in her chest. She hit publish on the announcement video, and then there was silence. For one terrifying minute, the number on the screen remained a flat, mocking 0. Her stomach dropped. Maybe she had misread everything. Maybe the supportive comments were just empty words. And then it happened. 1 sale, then 3, then 10. The number started to tick up, slowly at first, then faster and faster. A cascade of notifications flooding her screen. It was an avalanche. Within the first hour, she had surpassed her sales goal for the entire first month. By the end of the day, she had made more money than she had in the previous 6 months of brand deals and ad revenue combined. But it wasn't the number that made her cry. It was the messages that started pouring in. A freelance graphic designer from Ohio who finally had the confidence to sign a major client because he had a rock-solid contract. A baker in California starting her first e-commerce store who felt protected by a legitimate privacy policy. A pair of podcasters in Texas who used her partnership agreement to formalize their business. She hadn't just sold a product. She had sold empowerment. She had democratized a small piece of the law, taking it from the mahogany-paneled offices of corporate firms and putting it directly into the hands of the people who needed it most. It was a resounding victory, a validation of her vision and her gut-wrenching hard work. But as she watched the sales figures climb into the stratosphere, a new cold realization began to dawn on her. This level of success was a flare shot high into the night sky. It didn't just attract customers, it attracted attention. And in the world of law and business, attention from the wrong people could be far more dangerous than any algorithm change. She had just won the battle, but in doing so, she had announced her presence on a much larger, more treacherous battlefield. The victory lap was short-lived. In the digital world, a win isn't just a win. it's a signal flare. For every 1,000 aspiring creators who saw Lauren's success and felt inspired, there was one who saw it and felt threatened. And in the world she was now straddling, the world of mahogany desks and 100-year-old law firms, threats weren't handled with comment section callouts. They were handled with quiet, devastating precision. The old guard was watching. They who had built their empires on silent handshakes, exorbitant retainers, and reputations cultivated over decades in hushed courtrooms and exclusive country clubs. They saw her not as an innovator, but as an aberration. A garish, loud, and frankly undignified mockery of a sacred profession. To them, justice was a solemn affair, not a viral trend. Her short, snappy videos explaining complex legal concepts weren't democratizing the law, as her supporters claimed. They were unauthorized practice of law on a mass scale, or improper client solicitation, or conduct unbecoming of an officer of the court. They didn't see a lawyer connecting with the people. They saw a carnival barker selling legal snake oil. The first shot wasn't fired in a courtroom. It didn't come as a lawsuit or a cease and desist. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not in a DM or an email, but in a stiff cream-colored envelope delivered by certified mail. An envelope that felt heavier than it should. Inside, on the letterhead of the State Bar Association, was a notification. A formal ethics complaint had been filed against her. Anonymously. The language was cold, sterile, and terrifying. It was a list of accusations, each one a potential career-ending landmine. Allegations of improper advertising, citing her videos as a form of direct solicitation, forbidden by their archaic rules. Accusations of creating an attorney-client relationship with millions of followers without the proper formalities, exposing her to unimaginable liability. They even twisted her victory against the big brand, framing it as a stunt to attract clients, rather than a legitimate legal dispute. Every word was a carefully crafted dagger. And the most terrifying part? It wasn't entirely baseless. She was operating in a gray area so vast and knew that the old rules didn't know what to do with it. She had always known there was a risk, a theoretical danger that the establishment would one day take notice. But theory had just become a piece of paper in her hand. A paper that demanded a formal sworn response within 30 days. Failure to respond was an admission of guilt. An inadequate response could trigger a full investigation, a hearing, sanctions, public censure, or the ultimate professional death sentence. Disbarment. Her license, the very foundation of her entire identity as Lauren the lawyer, was now under direct attack. The anonymous nature of the complaint was the cruelest part. It was a ghost in the machine. She was fighting a shadow, but she knew, with a cold certainty that settled in her stomach, exactly where it came from. It came from the world of firms like Sterling, Cromwell, and Pierce. A fictional name but a real archetype. The kind of firm whose partners' portraits hung on the walls, dating back to the Theodore Roosevelt administration. The kind of firm that viewed a website as a newfangled concession to modernity and considered social media a cesspool. They didn't need to advertise. Their clients were corporations, inherited wealth, and institutions that had been with them for generations. Their power wasn't in follower counts. It was in judges they'd known for 30 years, in politicians whose campaigns they'd quietly funded, in the very fabric of the legal system they had helped build and now fiercely protected. And Lauren, with her iPhone and her ring light, was a threat to that system. She was making law accessible, understandable, and worst of all, affordable. She was teaching people their rights, showing them they didn't need a $10,000 retainer just to get a straight answer. She wasn't just taking a slice of the pie. She was trying to give the recipe away for free. This complaint wasn't about ethics. It was a warning shot. A message. Asterisk, stay in your lane. Know your place. This world is ours, not yours. Asterisk, her first instinct, the influencer instinct, was to fight fire with fire. To go live. To hold up the letter, her voice shaking with righteous anger, and expose the faceless cowards trying to silence her. She could craft the perfect narrative. David versus Goliath. The young, innovative woman of the people against the dusty, corrupt old boys club. Her audience would rally behind her. The story would go viral. The outrage would be deafening. It was her most powerful weapon, the court of public opinion. But then the lawyer in her took over. The cold, calculating strategist that had won her that first big case. And that lawyer knew that a state bar ethics committee was not the court of public opinion. These were not impressionable followers. They were a panel of gray-haired attorneys, appointed to uphold the very traditions she was being accused of desecrating. Waging a public war against them would be seen as an attack on the institution itself. It would be perceived as intimidation, as a lack of respect for the process. It would prove their point. It would be like showing up to a gunfight and trying to win by getting the most likes. She was trapped. Her greatest strength, her public platform, was now her greatest liability. Using it could be professional suicide. Not using it felt like a surrender, like fighting their battle on their turf by their rules. She sat in her office, the glow of her monitor illuminating the letter on her desk. The millions of followers, the likes, the supportive comments, they all felt a million miles away. They couldn't help her here. She started digging. She spent hours combing through the State Bar Journal, legal directories, and public records, looking for the fingerprints of firms like Sterling, Cromwell, and Pierce. She looked at the members of the Ethics Committee, tracing their careers, their past partnerships, their connections. And the picture that emerged was chilling. It was a closed loop, a web of interlocking relationships. The lawyers on the committee had partners who had clerked for judges who played golf with the senior partners at the big firms. It was a system designed to protect itself. And she was the foreign body it was now mobilizing to reject. This wasn't just a complaint. It was an immune response. She felt a profound sense of isolation. Out there, in the digital world, she was a giant. And here, in the real world of legal power, she was nothing. An insect. The path of the influencer was loud, public, and built on transparency. The path of the lawyer was quiet, private, and built on meticulous, confidential preparation. For the first time, those two identities were not in synergy. They were at war with each other. To win as a lawyer, she might have to kill the influencer. To survive as an influencer, she might have to risk being disbarred as a lawyer. The 30-day clock was ticking. Every day of silence was a day the anonymous complaint festered, its narrative taking hold within the bar's formal channels. Every public post she made, no matter how innocuous, could now be twisted and used as evidence against her. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the Instagram icon, her mind racing with video ideas, scripts that would expose the hypocrisy. But then her eyes fell on the business card she'd kept on her desk for years, the card of the most feared, most respected, and most expensive ethics defense attorney in the state. Two different weapons for two different wars. One button would rally an army of millions. The other would hire a single lethal assassin. And in that moment, she knew that choosing one might mean losing the other, and everything she had built, forever. The choice wasn't abstract. It arrived in the form of a man named David Chan, a software engineer who had poured his life savings and a decade of his life into creating a revolutionary piece of code for logistics management. It was brilliant. So brilliant, in fact, that a tech behemoth a company we'll call Omnicorp saw it, wanted it, and when Chun refused to sell for pennies on the dollar, they simply took it. They hired one of his junior developers, and 6 months later, Omnicorp launched a new platform that was, almost line for line, a mirror image of Chen's life's work. He was crushed, not just financially but spiritually. He had a patent, a clear case of infringement, but he was one man against a corporate titan with a legal department bigger than most countries' armies. He came to Lauren not with hope, but with the last embers of a dying fire. This was a classic assassin job. This wasn't a case for public spectacle. It was a war to be fought in the silent, carpeted halls of justice, in the dense, arcane language of patent law. Lauren pressed the second button. She assembled a dream team. A patent specialist who could recite intellectual property code in his sleep, a forensic tech analyst who could trace the stolen code back to its source, and she, Lauren, as the strategist, the general coordinating the attack. For months, they lived in the trenches. They worked 18-hour days fueled by cold pizza and a burning sense of righteousness. They filed motions, deposed witnesses, and built a fortress of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. They were playing the game exactly as it was meant to be played. They were honoring the system. And the system was failing them. Omnicorp didn't fight them on the merits of the case. They didn't have to. They fought them on the calendar. They buried them in mountains of irrelevant discovery requests, thousands of pages of useless documents designed for one purpose: to bleed David Chan dry. They filed motion after frivolous motion, each one requiring a response, a hearing, and thousands of dollars in legal fees. It was a war of attrition, and Omnicorp had an infinite supply of soldiers and bullets. Lauren watched as David Chan, a proud, brilliant man, began to shrink. He mortgaged his house. He emptied his kids' college funds. The opposing counsel was a picture of smug corporate civility, always polite, always reasonable, while systematically strangling the life out of her client. The breaking point came during a settlement conference. After 6 months of brutal litigation, Omnicorp's lawyer slid a piece of paper across the polished mahogany table. It was an offer. Not a real offer, but an insult wrapped in legal jargon. It was less than what David Chun had already spent on legal fees. It was a symbolic gesture of dominance, a way of saying, "We know you're right and we don't care. We will ruin you before we let you win." Lauren looked across the table at the soulless, expensive suits. Then she looked at her client, whose face was a mask of exhausted defeat. He was ready to take it. He just wanted the bleeding to stop. In that sterile, soundproofed room, Lauren felt a rage so pure it was almost clarifying. The assassin she had hired was a master swordsman, but Omnicorp had brought a tank to a sword fight. The traditional weapons were useless. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in her office, the city lights twinkling below, the settlement offer sitting on her desk like a death certificate. She had played their game by their rules and lost. But what if she refused to play their game? What if she changed the battlefield entirely? She picked up her phone. The screen lit up, showing the portal to her other world. Millions of followers. An army waiting for a signal. For years she had kept these two worlds separate. The law was sacred, a cloistered world of precedent and procedure. Social media was the Wild West. To bring one into the other felt like a sacrilege, a violation of an unspoken code. The Bar Association, other lawyers, judges, they would see it as a cheap, undignified stunt. It could damage her reputation beyond repair, could get her sanctioned, it could be the end of her legal career. But then she thought of David Chen's face. She thought of the injustice of a system so perfectly designed for the powerful to crush the powerless. And she realized her reputation was worthless if she couldn't use her power to protect people like him. The two buttons weren't a choice between two different weapons. They were a choice between two different definitions of justice. One was the system as it was. The other was the system as it should be. She wasn't just David Chen's lawyer. She was a storyteller. And this was the most important story she had ever had to tell. She turned on her camera. No fancy lighting, no script. Just her in her office in the middle of the night, with the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She didn't yell. She didn't grandstand. She calmly, methodically laid out the facts. She explained what a patent was. She explained what David Chun had created. She never mentioned Omnicorp by name, but she put the court filing number on the screen. She put redacted documents on the screen, showing the timeline of events. She explained, in the simplest terms, how a legal strategy of starvation by 1,000 cuts was being used to deny a man justice. She wasn't speaking as a lawyer to a judge. She was speaking as a human being to millions of other human beings. She told them that the system, our system, was being used as a weapon, and she asked a simple question. Is this right? She finished the video, her heart pounding in her chest. Her finger hovered over the post button. This was it, the point of no return. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was no longer just an influencer. She was about to merge the two identities into something new, something powerful, and something incredibly dangerous. She took a deep breath, and she pressed the button. She launched the army. For a moment there was silence. Then the notifications began. A trickle, then a stream, then a flood. Likes, shares, comments. The view count climbed with dizzying speed. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 in the first 10 minutes. People weren't just watching, they were investigating. They were looking up the court filing number. They were finding Omnicorp's name. They were flooding Omnicorp's social media with questions, with outrage. Hashtag Justice for Chen started trending. Major tech journalists started emailing her. The story was escaping the confines of the legal world and exploding into the public consciousness. Lauren sat back, watching the digital wildfire she had started. A strange mix of terror and triumph washing over her. She had kicked the hornet's nest. She had declared war on a giant. And she had no idea what was about to happen next. Then her phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number. She answered, her voice steady. The voice on the other end was not the smug, condescending tone of Omnicorp's lead counsel. It was clipped, strained, and stripped of all its previous arrogance. And all it said was, "What have you done?" Lauren held the phone to her ear, the silence on her end a stark contrast to the panicked breathing on the other. She let him squirm in it, let the weight of what he was seeing on his dozen monitors and television screens sink in. "What have you done?" he repeated, his voice cracking under the strain. Lauren took a slow, deliberate breath. "I believe the more accurate question, counsel, is what has Omnicorp done?" I just provided the footnotes. She could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the desperate search for a legal angle, a motion to file, a precedent to cite. But he would find none, because Lauren hadn't played his game. She'd thrown the entire board into a wood chipper and created a new one on her own terms. While he had been preparing his discovery requests and drafting motions to dismiss, Lauren had been preparing for a different kind of war. This wasn't a legal battle fought in the hushed, wood-paneled halls of a courthouse. This was an information war, fought on the chaotic, decentralized, and lightning-fast battleground of the internet. The first tremor hit not on Twitter or TikTok, but in a place Omnicorp's multi-million-dollar public relations firm would never think to look. A niche, highly technical forum for environmental chemists. An anonymous user posted a single, heavily redacted page from an Omnicorp internal report. It was just a chemical breakdown of a water sample, filled with jargon and molecular diagrams. To a layman, it was gibberish. To the handful of experts on that forum, it was a smoking gun, a chemical signature that simply should not exist in groundwater near a residential area. The debate began instantly. The second tremor struck an hour later, on a subreddit dedicated to forensic accounting. Another anonymous user, a different one, posted a single spreadsheet. No context, no explanation. Just rows and columns of numbers from an Omnicorp subsidiary's expense ledger. It showed a bizarre and massive budget allocation to something coded as Project Nightingale, with payments funneled through 3 separate shell corporations for geological survey and soil remediation. But the numbers didn't add up. They were too clean, too round, too perfect. For the amateur sleuths and off-duty accountants on the forum, it was an irresistible puzzle. They started digging. The third, fourth, and fifth tremors followed in quick succession. A partial schematic for a waste disposal pump, missing its safety overflow valve, appeared on an engineering Discord server. An internal email chain discussing unavoidable perimeter seepage was posted to a document sharing site and linked by a whistleblower advocacy group. A heavily compressed audio file, just 30 seconds long, captured a project manager telling someone, "Just sign the damn report. What the EPA doesn't know won't hurt them." Lauren hadn't dropped a bomb. She had scattered puzzle pieces across the entire digital landscape. She knew that a single massive data dump would be dismissed as a hack, or it would be too dense for anyone to parse. Omnicorp's lawyers would file an injunction, and it would be taken down. But this was different. This was insidious. It was brilliant. She wasn't the source. She was merely the catalyst. The internet itself became the investigator. The chemists on the forum identified the contaminant. The accountants on Reddit traced the money and realized soil remediation was a cover for a massive, illegal dumping operation. The engineers on Discord matched the faulty pump schematic to the facility's public blueprints. Each community, working in its own silo, found a piece of the truth. The final masterstroke was the narrative. As these disparate communities began to buzz, a fourth, completely separate entity emerged. A brand new YouTube channel with no subscribers and a single video uploaded a 10-minute documentary. It was titled The People of Northwood Creek. It wasn't about Omnicorp. It was about the families. It featured heartbreaking interviews with parents whose children had unexplainable illnesses, farmers whose livestock were dying, elderly residents who had lived there their whole lives, and were now afraid to drink the water from their own taps. The video was slick, professionally edited, and emotionally devastating. And woven throughout the human stories, it began to connect the dots. It showed a screenshot of the chemist's discussion. It highlighted a key thread from the accounting subreddit. It played the 30-second audio clip of the project manager. It didn't make accusations. It just asked questions. It presented the evidence that was bubbling up, organically, all over the internet, and laid it at the feet of the victims. The video was seeded not by Lauren, but by her community. She sent the link to a handful of her most trusted, longtime followers, the ones who had been with her since the beginning. And they, in turn, shared it with their networks. It was an exponential explosion. By the time Omnicorp's lawyer was on the phone with Lauren, Project Nightingale was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The subreddit was flooded with thousands of new members, all cross-referencing data. The YouTube video had 500,000 views, and was being embedded in articles by independent journalists who had been tipped off. Her own TikTok and Instagram accounts were silent. She hadn't posted a thing. She didn't have to. She had created a self-sustaining firestorm of truth. "You can't prove I did anything," Lauren said calmly into the phone, her voice a blade of ice. "There is no chain of custody that leads to me. There is only publicly available information being discussed by concerned citizens. Are you planning on suing the entire Internet Council? A long, strained silence. He was trapped. If they issued a statement denying it, they would only add fuel to the fire, confirming that the fragmented documents were real. If they tried to send cease and desist letters, they would look like corporate bullies trying to silence a grassroots movement. They had no one to sue, no one to intimidate. They were fighting a ghost. An idea. This is not how the law works, he finally sputtered, his voice a mixture of fury and disbelief. You can't just unleash chaos and call it justice. There are rules. Procedures. Your rules, Lauren corrected him. Your procedures. The ones designed to bury people like my clients in paperwork until they give up or die. The ones that allow a corporation with infinite resources to outspend and outlast a family fighting for their child's life. I'm not breaking the rules. I'm exposing a game that was already rigged. She could hear him pacing, his breath ragged. He was a creature of the courtroom, of precedent and procedure. He was facing an enemy he couldn't comprehend. You think you've won, he hissed, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. The desperation was gone, replaced by something far colder. You think you're a hero, but you just broke the first rule of this kind of fight. You made it personal. You didn't just come after the company. You made fools of us. You embarrassed people with very long memories and very deep pockets. Lauren felt a chill, but her voice didn't waver. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact, he retorted. The courtroom has rules of engagement. Evidence, discovery, cross-examination. You've just dragged this fight out into the street. And in the street there are no rules. You went after our business. We're now going to go after yours. Before Lauren could respond, he hung up. The line went dead. She stood there for a moment, the silence of her apartment suddenly feeling heavier. She had won the battle. The truth about Project Nightingale was out, and Omnicorp would never be able to put the genie back in the bottle. The regulatory agencies, now under immense public pressure, would be forced to act. Her clients would get their day not just in court but in the court of public opinion where they had already won. But the lawyer's final words echoed in her mind. We're now going to go after yours. What was her business? Her law practice was small, clean. Her business was her reputation, her credibility, her channel, her life, which she had so carefully curated and presented to millions of people. Her phone buzzed again. It wasn't a call this time. It was a news alert from a major media outlet. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she read the headline. It had nothing to do with Omnicorp. It had nothing to do with Northwood Creek. The headline was her name. And next to it were two words that made the blood drain from her face. Bar Association investigation. For a long moment the world went silent. The city noise outside her window, the hum of her laptop, the very beat of her own heart. It all faded into a dull, distant roar. There was only the screen. The letters, sharp and black, felt like they were branding themselves onto her retinas. Bar Association investigation. Her name. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a different Lauren. It was her, Lauren Pierce. The article, published by a well-respected legal trade journal, was clinical and brutal. It cited an anonymous complaint filed with the State Bar, alleging multiple ethical violations. The language was dense with professional jargon, but the accusations were clear as day. Unauthorized practice of law across state lines, improper solicitation of clients, misleading legal advertisement. Every single charge was a direct attack on her social media presence. Her legal Q&A sessions, where she'd break down complex topics for her followers. The article framed them as giving legal advice to people in states where she wasn't licensed to practice. Her DM me for a consult link in her bio, labeled as a form of aggressive, improper solicitation, something ambulance chasers did, not respectable attorneys. Her viral videos explaining how to navigate small claims court or deal with the landlord, characterized as misleading advertisements that failed to include the necessary disclaimers, creating an attorney-client relationship where none existed. It was a systematic dismantling of everything she had built. Each point was a poison dart aimed at the heart of her brand. They weren't just questioning her methods, they were questioning her ethics, her integrity, her very right to call herself a lawyer. The anonymous source quoted in the article was devastatingly effective. Miss Pierce has mistaken popularity for propriety, the quote read. She plays fast and loose with rules that exist to protect the public, all for the sake of likes and shares. The bar has a duty to intervene before real harm is done. The phone vibrated on the table, a sudden violent buzz that shattered the silence. It was a text from Sarah, her paralegal. "Lauren, have you seen the article? My phone is blowing up." Before she could even process it, another came through. And another. Then her email notifications began to pop up in the corner of her screen. A relentless cascade of subject lines filled with alarm and concern. She clicked open her main social media app. The change was instantaneous and visceral. Her last post, a cheerful video about the Northwood Creek case gaining momentum, was now a war zone. The top comments, once a stream of fire emojis and messages of support, had been buried under an avalanche of doubt and accusation. "So you're not even a real lawyer," one said. "I knew it was too good to be true." Unfollowing. "My cousin in Texas followed your advice and got screwed. I hope they take your license." This is what happens when you get your legal advice from TikTok. The trolls were out in force, of course, but it was the comments from her genuine followers that cut the deepest. The ones filled with confusion and a sense of betrayal. "Lauren, please tell us this isn't true. I trusted you. I thought you were different." The community she had so carefully cultivated, the space she had built on a foundation of trust and transparency, was fracturing in real time. The digital ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Her phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name that made her stomach clench. Arthur Vance, the firm's managing partner. He was a man from a different era. A lawyer who believed the best marketing was a firm handshake and a membership at the right country club. He had always been skeptical of her online activities, viewing them as a frivolous, undignified distraction. She let it ring, the sound echoing her own panicked heartbeat. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time, she knew she couldn't ignore it. She took a shaky breath and answered. "Lauren." His voice was cold, devoid of any preamble. "My office. Now." The line went dead. The drive to the firm was a blur. She felt disconnected from her own body, like she was watching a movie of someone else's life falling apart. The oak-paneled walls of Arthur Vance's office felt like they were closing in on her. He was sitting behind his enormous mahogany desk, a printed copy of the article laid out in front of him, its headline circled in red ink. "Explain this," he said, not as a question but as a command. Lauren tried to speak, to form a defense, but her words caught in her throat. What could she say? That it was a misunderstanding? A hit piece? "Arthur, I never gave specific legal advice to anyone without a formal engagement. My videos always have disclaimers. I've been so careful." Careful. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Lauren, we have the board of a multi-billion-dollar corporation calling us, asking if their lead counsel on a 9-figure lawsuit is about to be disbarred. We have reporters from the Wall Street Journal calling our front desk. The word careful does not seem appropriate right now." He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of ice. "This sideshow of yours, this Lauren the lawyer persona, I tolerated it because it was harmless. I was wrong. It's not harmless. It's a liability. It's a stain on this firm's reputation. A reputation we have spent 60 years building." Every word was a hammer blow. The firm wasn't her family. It was a business, and she had just become bad for business. "The partners had an emergency call this morning," he continued, his tone final. "Effective immediately, you're on a mandatory leave of absence, pending the outcome of the bar's investigation. You will hand over all your files on the Omnicorp case to Mark Davison. Your access to the firm's network will be terminated at 5 p.m. We'll have your personal effects boxed up and sent to you." It was an execution. Clean, swift, and brutal. She was out. Stripped of her cases, locked out of her office, cut off from the career she had spent her entire adult life building. She walked out of his office in a daze, not even remembering the conversation ending. As she stood in the lobby waiting for the elevator, a thought crystallized in her mind, sharp and cold as a shard of glass. The timing. It was too perfect. The Northwood Creek case was at a critical juncture. She had Omnicorp on the ropes, their stock was taking a hit, and public opinion was turning against them. They were getting desperate. And then, out of nowhere, a perfectly crafted, professionally devastating complaint appears at the state bar, leaked to the press to cause maximum damage. An anonymous complaint. This wasn't some disgruntled follower or a jealous rival. This was a professional hit. Omnicorp wasn't just fighting her in the courtroom, they were fighting her everywhere. They had found her other front, her source of power, and they had firebombed it. They weren't trying to win the case anymore. They were trying to destroy the lawyer. She finally made it back to her apartment, the silence now deafening. The boxes from her office would arrive tomorrow. The career she had sacrificed so much for was gone, at least for now. Her online reputation, the engine of her success, was in flames. She was isolated, discredited, and facing an enemy with limitless resources and no morality. She sank onto her couch, the glow of her phone screen illuminating her face. The hate comments were still pouring in. It would be so easy to just disappear. To delete the accounts, change her name and just run. To let them win. But as she stared at the screen, at the wreckage of the world she had built, a different feeling began to smolder beneath the fear and the despair. It was a tiny flickering ember of defiance. They had come after her name. They had come after her career. They had come after her voice. They thought they had silenced her. They had made a very, very big mistake. They had made a very, very big mistake. That ember of defiance, it didn't just flicker. Caught. It ignited a firestorm. For days, Lauren had been drowning in a sea of legalese and threats, feeling like a defendant in her own life. But in that moment of absolute clarity, she remembered something fundamental. She wasn't just an influencer. She wasn't just a target. She was a damn good lawyer. And the law, the very weapon they were using against her, was a sword that could be wielded by both sides. They had started a legal war. She was about to finish it. The first step was to stop thinking like a victim. She went back to her roots, to the all-nighters in the law library, to the thrill of dissecting a case until its weaknesses were laid bare. She pulled up the cease and desist letter, the lawsuit, every threatening email. This time she didn't read them with fear. She read them with the cold, calculating eye of an opponent. She saw the overreach, the flimsy claims, the thinly veiled attempt to intimidate her into silence. They had accused her of defamation, of disparaging the firm. But what had she actually done? She had told her story, the truth. And in the United States, the truth is an absolute defense against defamation. They knew that. This wasn't about the law, it was about power. It was a strategic lawsuit against public participation. A slap suit, designed to bury her in legal fees and shut her up. But they had miscalculated. They thought she was just a girl who made videos. They forgot she was a girl who had passed the bar exam. So she didn't just defend. She attacked. Lauren drafted a countersuit that was a masterclass in legal aggression. It wasn't just a response. It was a declaration of war. Count 1, malicious prosecution. She alleged that her former firm had initiated the lawsuit against her not with a legitimate legal claim, but with malice, for the sole purpose of harassing and injuring her. She laid out the evidence. The timing of the suit right after her viral success, the lack of any real damages to the firm, the threatening tone of their communications. Count 2, tortious interference with business relations. This was the dagger. She argued that their lawsuit was a deliberate and unlawful attempt to destroy her brand, her business, and her relationships with her audience and potential sponsors. They weren't just suing her. They were trying to financially ruin her, to cut off her livelihood because she had dared to build one outside of their control. And then she did something her old firm never saw coming. She took the entire battle public. The very platform they wanted to silence her on became her greatest weapon. She didn't just post about the lawsuit. She educated her audience on it. She broke down her own countersuit, line by line, in a series of TikToks and YouTube shorts. She explained what a slap suit was, turning her personal nightmare into a real-time, high-stakes civics lesson for millions. She demystified the legal process, translating the dense, intimidating language of the court into clear, compelling content. The response was explosive. Her audience, who had come for legal tips and stayed for her authenticity, now saw her as a champion fighting a real-life Goliath. A GoFundMe for her legal defense fund shattered its goal in under 24 hours. Other lawyers, both influencers and traditional practitioners who were tired of the profession's stuffy, antiquated gatekeeping, began to speak out in her defense. Legal scholars wrote articles about her case. News outlets picked up the story. She wasn't just Lauren the lawyer anymore. She was the face of a rebellion. The old firm was completely blindsided. They operated in a world of closed-door meetings, confidential settlements, and quiet intimidation. They had no idea how to fight a war in the court of public opinion. Every legal filing they made was immediately screenshotted, analyzed, and critiqued by an army of online sleuths led by Lauren herself. Their strategy of bleeding her dry with legal fees backfired spectacularly. as her community crowdfunded a war chest that rivaled their own. They were hemorrhaging clients and their public reputation was in tatters. The very thing they had accused Lauren of, damaging the firm's name, they were now accomplishing all by themselves. The discovery process was a bloodbath. Lauren's legal team, funded by her supporters, deposed the firm's partners. Under oath, they were forced to admit they had no concrete evidence of financial harm caused by her videos. They squirmed when asked to point to a single defamatory statement that wasn't either an opinion or a verifiable fact. Emails were uncovered showing partners discussing the threat her online presence posed, and the need to make an example of her. The malice Lauren had alleged in her countersuit wasn't just a claim anymore. It was documented in their own words. The firm, seeing the writing on the wall, tried to offer a settlement. Quiet deal. They'd drop their suit if she dropped hers, and everyone would sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, burying the story forever. A year ago, Lauren might have taken it. The relief, the end of the fight, would have been tempting. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every creator who had ever been bullied by a corporation. It was about every young lawyer who had been told to sit down and be quiet. It was about the principle that the truth should not be silenced. She refused the settlement. She was taking them to court. The trial was a media circus. But inside the courtroom, it was Lauren's show. She took the stand not as a panicked influencer, but as a poised and articulate officer of the court. She walked the jury through her journey, from an eager young associate to a disillusioned employee to a creator who found her voice by helping others. When the firm's lawyers cross-examined her, trying to paint her as a greedy, fame-seeking millennial, she didn't flinch. She answered every question with facts, with evidence, and with an unshakable belief in her right to tell her own story. The verdict came back in less than a day. The jury found entirely in Lauren's favor. They threw out the firm's lawsuit, finding it to be without merit. And then came the countersuit. They found the firm guilty of malicious prosecution. They found them guilty of tortious interference. And they awarded Lauren damages. Not a small amount, a figure so large it made headlines across the country. It was more than just money. It was vindication. It was a symbol. The jury, a group of ordinary people, had seen the truth. They had seen a powerful institution try to crush an individual, and they had said, no, not today. The aftermath was transformative. The old firm, crippled by the judgment and the public relations disaster, eventually dissolved. Some partners retired. Others scattered to different firms, their names forever linked to the case that became a law school ethics lesson. For Lauren, the victory was a springboard. She didn't just go back to making videos. She founded a new type of law firm. A firm built for the digital age, one that embraced social media, transparency, and public education. She specialized in representing creators, entrepreneurs, and whistleblowers, people facing their own Goliaths. Her case, Miller v. Sterling and Croft, became a landmark. It sent a shockwave through the legal world. It forced state bars and ethics committees to re-examine their outdated rules on advertising and social media. It demonstrated, in the most dramatic way possible, that a lawyer's duty to the public could be fulfilled not just in a courtroom, but on a smartphone screen. It legitimized the path of the lawyer influencer, proving it wasn't a frivolous distraction, but a powerful new frontier for the profession. The rise of lawyer influencers wasn't just about a few charismatic personalities finding fame online. It was a symptom of a much larger shift. It was about the democratization of information. For centuries, the law was kept behind a wall of jargon and exorbitant fees, accessible only to the wealthy and the connected. People like Lauren, and the many who followed in her footsteps, took a sledgehammer to that wall. They made the law accessible, understandable, and even entertaining. They empowered millions of people to understand their own rights, to navigate complex systems, and to feel a little less helpless in a world full of contracts and fine print. Lauren's story is a testament to the fact that the old guards of power are crumbling. The institutions that once held a monopoly on information and authority are being challenged by individuals armed with a camera, a cause, and the courage to speak. It's a story about how one person, by finding her voice, can give voice to countless others. It's a reminder that the most powerful weapon against injustice is not silence, but a story told well, and a truth told loudly, for the entire world to hear.